For 40 years, Jonah Mercer helped people who had nowhere else to turn. He fixed their shoes when they couldn't pay, gave them food when they were hungry, and never asked for anything back. But now, Jonah is the one running out of time. His health is failing, and he may lose the only shop he has left. And beneath his workbench sits a wooden box filled with secrets, until one morning, a stranger walks through the door. Welcome to Heart and Home, where every story reminds us that kindness, love, and family can change a life forever. Every heart has a story, and every story begins somewhere. Where are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you. Imagine spending 40 years repairing shoes, lending bus fare, sharing food, and quietly helping people keep walking, without ever keeping score. Now imagine the day finally comes when you're the one who needs saving, and you'd rather lose everything than let anyone find out. For weeks, Jonah Mercer keeps his shop open under a set of elevated train tracks, keeps a wooden box hidden under his workbench, and keeps quiet about a secret that's about to catch up with him. Until a stranger with a broken work boot walks through his door and begins noticing everything Jonah has tried to hide. This is the story of Jonah Mercer, in a neighborhood that spent 40 years quietly keeping track of him, without him ever knowing it. If stories like this one move you, stay with us. There are many more waiting for you, further down this channel. Now let's go back to the morning it all began. 517, under the tracks, at a shop that opens before the rest of the city wakes up. Greyhaven is the kind of city that never really sleeps. Even when the sky is still dark, the first trains are already running along the elevated tracks, dragging that low metal groan through the old blocks below. Under those tracks, in a stretch of the city called Iron Row, the day starts before the rest of Greyhaven is even awake. 5:17 in the morning. Workers in reflective vests step off the bus, heads down against the first cold winds of winter. In the middle of that hurried crowd, an old man slowly pulls up the iron gate of a small shop. The sign above it has gone pale from years of rain and sun. Mercer's Shoe Repair, fixing shoes since 1981. The old man's name is Jonah Mercer, 72 years old. His hands are covered in calluses. His back has curved, for more than 40 years bent over other people's shoes. Jonah always opens at 5, not because the shop is busy, because he knows the people working the early shift can't wait until 9. That morning, Jonah had just switched on his desk lamp when a young delivery kid came running up. His name was Kevin, 19 years old. The sole of his left sneaker had almost torn loose. His sock underneath was soaked through with melted snow. Kevin had less than 40 minutes to make his first delivery. He dug through his pockets and set a few loose coins on the table, not nearly enough to pay for the work. Jonah didn't ask any questions. He just pulled out the wooden chair. Sit down. While he worked, Kevin asked how long it took to learn all this. Jonah didn't look up from the stitching. Longer than you've got right now. 15 minutes later, the shoe was stitched back together with a strong black thread. Before Kevin left, Jonah pulled a dry pair of socks out of a drawer. Kevin said he'd come back Friday to pay the rest. Jonah just answered, "Your feet still have to work today, though." Across the street, Michael Grant had watched the whole thing. He wasn't planning to stop. His shift at the warehouse started at 5:30. The company van was already waiting at the corner. Michael wasn't the kind of man who liked getting involved in other people's business. In his mind, this city was too big and too busy for anyone to look after more than themselves. He'd just stepped off the curb when he heard the wet slap of something under his own foot. The sole of his left work boot had come loose again. He'd been holding it together with tape for 3 days, hoping it would last to his next paycheck. This time, the tape gave out for good. Michael looked at the van waiting for him, then at the little shop that had just opened across the street. That was the first time Michael Grant walked into Jonah Mercer's shoe repair shop. The shop inside was barely 15 square meters. Old shoe forms lined the walls, along with spools of thread, small hammers, pliers, scissors, and photographs that had faded with age. Jonah looked over Michael's boot. He said the sole had worn through months ago, Michael should have replaced it a long time back. Michael said it still worked fine. Jonah looked up. Until it doesn't. He got to work. Asked Michael to write his name on a slip for the shop record. Nothing formal, just a name and a number. Michael took the pen and hesitated a beat too long. Like the paper itself was the harder part of the job. On the table sat a cold cup of coffee and half a stale loaf of bread. 20 minutes later, Jonah set the boot down. $18. Michael handed him a 50 and told him to keep the change. Jonah handed the extra straight back. I fix shoes. I don't take charity. His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough for Michael to understand that help, if it came dressed as pity, would never make it through that door. Before he left, Michael's eyes landed on a small wooden box under the table. Jonah closed it fast, sharper than he'd said anything else all morning. That's not yours to look through. Michael asked what it was. Then, if not a ledger, Jonah said, some people pay in money. Some pay another way. Michael didn't understand. Jonah didn't explain. The warehouse where Michael worked employed over 100 people. A week after meeting Jonah, Michael found a bin in the break room full of old work boots, some ruined, but plenty just missing a sole or a lace. Nothing worse than that. Standard procedure said they'd all be hauled off by the weekend. He asked the safety supervisor if the good ones could be repaired instead. The man shrugged. Buying new was faster, but agreed to let Michael try 3 pairs, on the condition safety would inspect them again before handing them back out. 3 days later, the boots came back. Soles resewn tight, seams replaced, leather cleaned, so well you'd barely know they'd sat in a bin marked for the trash. A seasonal worker got one of the pairs. His own boots had a hole in them, days from his next paycheck. He asked who'd done the work. Michael pointed toward the tracks. An old guy in Iron Row. From 3 pairs, the number climbed to 7, then 12. Jonah still wrote a receipt for every one. Still charged the right price. Still handed back every cent of change. But Michael noticed him coughing more. Some days he'd have to stop, grip the table's edge, wait to catch his breath. Michael told him he should see a doctor. Jonah just said, doctors don't work for free. And that was how he ended every conversation about his own health. Nearly 2 weeks in, Michael came by late one afternoon and found the gate down. Around back, Jonah was sitting on the step, trying to stand and unable to. Michael got him up and walked him across the street to the diner. Teresa Alvarez, who ran the place, took one look and came back with a bowl of hot soup. She didn't ask if he wanted it. She just set the spoon down in front of him. A girl in a school uniform ran out from the kitchen, Lena, Jonah's granddaughter. She knelt beside him, half scared, half furious. He'd promised to close early. He'd promised to eat lunch. His last meal had been the morning before. While Jonah ate, Lena pulled Michael aside. Please don't try to give my grandfather money. He'll give it right back. Or he'll be too angry to sleep. Michael asked what was wrong with him. His heart wasn't good, Lena said. The doctor wanted treatment and more rest. But the shop was the only income they had. Her mother had died 3 years ago. Jonah had raised her alone since. The apartment above the shop was the only home either of them had. That night, Michael overheard Lena telling Teresa she was applying for a night shift at a packing plant. She was 16. Jonah was 3 months behind on rent. The landlord had given them until next week to pay at least part of it. Jonah sat a few feet away. He'd heard all of it. He just kept his head down and finished his soup, one small spoonful at a time. The next morning, a red notice went up on the shop door. Faulty wiring on the 2nd floor. A dead heater. A fire escape passcode. 14 days to fix it, or the building would be shut down. The shop closed. The apartment above it off limits too. Beside the city notice was a letter from Arthur Langford, the building's owner. The bank was pressing him over a loan gone past due. Michael offered to lend Jonah the rent money. Jonah refused. Michael brought up Lena, about to drop out of school. For the first time since they'd met, Jonah got angry, said Michael had no right to bring up his granddaughter. Michael knew he'd gone too far. He said it anyway. I'm not trying to save you. I'm just saying you can't solve all of this by yourself. Jonah looked straight at him. I've lived 72 years without needing a stranger to save me. In this city, everyone has to look after themselves. That was the exact thing Michael had believed, for years, too. That night, before Lena went up to bed, Jonah sat with her a moment at the table. He didn't apologize. He just said, quiet, "The day I can't take care of you is the day I don't know who I am anymore." Lena didn't say anything back. She leaned her head against his shoulder for a second, then went upstairs. Michael came back later that evening to apologize. Jonah was already asleep. Lena was doing homework under the desk lamp. Michael brought food and cold medicine, said he'd prepaid for a few future repairs so Jonah could write it in the book without it feeling like a handout. Lena laughed. "You're learning how to talk to my grandfather." While she cleared the table, Michael's eyes went to the wooden box again. This time, she checked the stairs once, making sure her grandfather was really asleep, before she lifted the lid. The slips inside weren't a debt ledger. Each one was a memory of someone who'd walked through that door. Malik Hayes, resewed work boots. 1 bus fare. 1 loaf of bread. Repair paid in full. Teresa Alvarez, new heel. First winter after Miguel died. Don't let her eat dinner alone. Rosa Bennett, fixed her only pair of shoes before an interview. No charge. Hundreds like that. Michael asked why Jonah kept them. To remember, Lena said. Some people paid him back in money. Some fixed his pipes. Some just sat with him on nights he didn't want to be alone. But none of them knew he was about to lose the shop. He'd never told anyone. He didn't want the kindness he'd given years ago to turn into debts somebody had to repay. Michael picked up the slip with Malik Hayes' name on it. He knew Malik, foreman on a site 2 blocks from the warehouse. And for the first time, he understood what Jonah had meant. Some people don't pay you back in money. Maybe they just haven't realized yet that it's their turn to come back. The next morning, Michael found Malik at the job site, clearing a crew out of a danger zone before the crane started up. A hard man, didn't smile much, ran a tight ship on safety. Michael handed him the old slip. Malik read his own name and went still. 23 years earlier, he'd come to Greyhaven with $40 in his pocket. His first day on a job, his only work boots split open. No boots meant no work. Jonah fixed them overnight, handed him bus fare and a loaf of bread besides. When his first paycheck came in, Malik went back to pay. Jonah took the money for the repair, wouldn't touch a cent for the rest. Malik asked what the building needed. Michael told him, stairs, wiring, heater, roof. Malik looked back at his crew. He couldn't just pull them off the job. The project was behind schedule, and the materials on his truck belonged to the company, not him. "I can't promise you the whole crew." Michael nodded. He'd expected that. But before he walked off, Malik added, "Tonight, I can come take a look at the stairs. Not a rescue yet. Just one man agreeing to stop and see what he could do." Teresa didn't need much explaining. The moment she learned Jonah had 12 days left, she called Rosa Bennett, a lawyer now for a tenants' rights group, who'd once owned exactly 1 pair of shoes good enough for an interview. The heel had snapped right before. Jonah fixed it for free and polished them himself. She'd walked into that office in old shoes and a completely different walk. Rosa couldn't just hear the story and fix everything on the spot. Her org had no repair fund, her calendar was full, and her supervisor thought the case was a losing one. Jonah behind on rent, the owner under bank pressure himself. Rosa said she needed 2 days to look at the file. Teresa asked if they had that much time. Rosa looked across the street. No. She went back to Iron Row anyway that night, read through the lease and the city notice at Teresa's table till nearly midnight. The next morning, she talked her supervisor into letting her take the case, on the condition the org wouldn't cover repair costs. She'd handle it on her own time. That was the first price Rosa paid. Not money. Time she didn't have much of to spare. Arthur Langford came to the shop that afternoon. Coat expensive, but worn. Polished leather shoes, a half-moon patch on the right heel, darkened with years. Jonah's eyes dropped to them for half a second. He didn't say anything. Langford, for his part, glanced around the shop like he was looking for something he half remembered, then let it go. He wasn't as wealthy as he looked. The building was the last thing his father had left him, and it carried a heavy loan he could no longer keep up with alone. Rosa didn't propose anything complicated. 3 things. Hold off selling for 30 days, cover the permit and reinspection costs, and if the building passed, Jonah got a 3-year lease and paid off the rest of his back rent in installments. In exchange, Michael would try to land the shop a standing repair contract with the warehouse. Langford didn't agree right away. A failed repair meant another month of interest. A long lease could drop the sale price. He asked if Michael was sure the warehouse would sign. Michael couldn't promise that. Langford checked his watch, looked at the offer sitting in his briefcase. Finally, "I'll give you 7 days to prove this can work." Rosa redrafted the agreement at Teresa's table. Langford signed. They hadn't saved the building. They'd bought one more chance. That evening, Malik came alone and found it worse than Michael thought. Rotted steps, a railing held by rusted nails, wiring one spark from a fire, a roof leaking straight into Lena's room. He said they'd need a licensed electrician, new materials, more time than they had. The next morning, Malik went to his company's owner, not asking to bring the whole crew for free, just offering to trade 2 of his own days off, use scrap lumber already cleared for disposal, and see who'd volunteer after hours. The owner refused at first. The job was already behind. Malik had to commit to finishing his own section by week's end, or lose his quarterly bonus. He agreed. That afternoon, he came back with 2 men. Not a convoy, not a miracle, just 3 guys with a toolbox and some usable wood. Teresa handled food. Kevin and his friends moved light supplies. Rosa kept working the paperwork with the city. Langford paid for permits and hired a licensed electrician. Michael went back to the warehouse, brought Jonah's invoices, the safety report, 3 repaired pairs of boots, proposed a 3-month trial instead of throwing out boots that could be saved. The finance manager said no, the savings weren't worth the liability. Michael spent the whole night at his kitchen table with paper and a calculator, working through numbers he hadn't touched since school. He almost gave up once. Then he thought of Lena and the withdrawal form still sitting there, and signed. The next morning he made his case again, this time showing the repairs also helped seasonal workers who couldn't yet afford new boots. The warehouse agreed to a 3-month trial. Not enough to solve everything. Enough to prove the shop could still make money. When Jonah found out everyone was fixing up the building, he told them to stop. Malik set his hammer down. Jonah said he'd only ever fixed 1 pair of shoes for him. "Those shoes kept my first job," Malik said. "That job fed 3 kids. It's why I'm standing here at all." Jonah still wouldn't accept it. Michael looked at the wooden box. "They're not here because they owe you." Jonah asked what they were here for, then. "Because there are days a person can't stand on their own." Jonah looked at the faces gathered around the shop. For the first time, he didn't find a reason to send them away. Over the days that followed, the shop changed a little at a time. A new step, rewired cable, a reinforced wall, an old but working heater donated once Malik's boss heard the story. Jonah wasn't allowed to do the heavy work. Teresa made him sit in the diner, and even hid his shoes so he couldn't sneak across the street. His whole life, he'd been the one bending down to fix what was broken in other people. Now he had to learn to sit still and let people fix what belonged to him. One evening, Michael went up to deal with the damaged ceiling and found a suitcase in Lena's room, already packed. Beside it, the withdrawal form, still unsigned. If the repairs failed, she said, they'd have to move into temporary housing. Jonah couldn't work like before. She couldn't keep going to school like nothing was wrong. Michael sat down next to the suitcase. At her age, his own father had been hurt in a work accident. The family needed money, so Michael dropped out. "I told myself it was only for a year," he said. Then another year passed. Then another. "I never went back." Lena asked if he regretted it. "Every day." She said at least he'd helped his family. "I helped them get through 1 year," Michael said. "Then I lived with it for the rest of mine." Lena was quiet a moment. Then she said maybe she didn't have to quit outright. Maybe she could just ask Teresa for after-school hours instead of the night shift, do less instead of nothing. Michael said that part was hers to decide, not his. She looked at the form a long time, then tore it in half, then quarters, and dropped it in the trash. Michael looked at the torn pieces. But what he'd just said hadn't only been for her. 2 days before the deadline, Malik pulled back the old roofing and found more rot than expected. Not enough material left, and the donations were nearly spent. The next morning, Teresa posted an old photo online. A younger Jonah standing in front of the shop with a group of iron row workers. Underneath, "For over 40 years, This man helped the working people of this neighborhood keep walking. Today, his roof can't stand anymore. The post got shared, dozens, then hundreds. $5, 10, 20, not some enormous fund, but by the end of the day, enough for the wood and the waterproofing they still needed. The storm forecast for the next day arrived early instead. Snow started falling at 8 that night, wind cutting hard along the tracks. The roof's main structure was finished, but the temporary covering tore loose at one corner in the wind. Malik wouldn't let anyone stand on the roof once the wind picked up. He and 2 men secured it from inside the attic, working off low scaffolding at the back of the building. Michael and the others held materials and hauled sandbags. Kevin lit the way with the work lights. Teresa kept the coffee coming. Langford showed up with extra lumber and stayed to help pass materials up. Lena watched from the window upstairs. The people who'd once walked through her grandfather's door, now trying to hold up the only home the 2 of them had. Jonah came out of the diner, couldn't just sit and watch. Michael stopped him and handed him the wooden box instead. "You've got a job. Tell her the stories in there." The 2 of them sat by the window while the wind mixed with hammers and voices outside. Jonah opened slip after slip. Malik, the young man who once thought he'd lose his job on day 1. Rosa and her 1 pair of interview shoes. Teresa, that first winter after her husband died, when Jonah used to stop by at closing with some excuse about needing hot water, just so she wouldn't eat dinner alone. "You remember all of them?" Lena asked. Jonah watched the shapes moving in the storm. "I think I do." She squeezed his hand. "But they remember you too." Outside, the last corner of the roof got secured. The storm ended near dawn. At 7, the city inspector checked the wiring, the heater, the stairs, the fire escape, the second-floor structure. Nobody spoke while he worked. He tested the railing, climbed each step, checked the reinforced ceiling and the electrician's certification. Finally, he closed the folder. The building was cleared to keep operating. Before signing, he pointed at the new exit sign, slightly crooked. Kevin grabbed a ladder to fix it, and for the first time in days, everyone laughed. Lena hugged Jonah. Teresa turned away, wiping her eyes. Langford stayed by the door a while longer, then came in with a folder of his own. He'd talked to the bank again. The warehouse contract and the past inspection were enough for them to extend his loan, as long as he kept his tenant and stayed on schedule with the rest. He wouldn't sell. Jonah got a 3-year lease, the rest of his back rent coming out of the repair contract's income, little by little. Nobody wiped the debt out entirely. Nobody turned the shop into some big organization. They'd just given Jonah enough time and enough work to hold on to it himself. Jonah asked why Langford had changed his mind. Langford looked down at the shoes he was wearing, his father's. He only wore them on important days. Years ago, Jonah had patched a half-moon of leather onto that heel, right before Langford's mother's funeral. Jonah bent down and recognized it, the patch and 2 small initials he'd stamped into the lining himself a long time back. "This city makes people forget a lot of things," Langford said. He looked around the shop. "Good things some things remember for us." Jonah picked up the pen. This time he signed. 3 months later, the old sign is still there under the tracks. Mercer's Shoe Repair. No community center, no new building. Just fresh paint on the door and a small sign behind the counter. Trade lessons, Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was Lena's idea, actually, a couple evenings a week, teaching what her grandfather knew. Kevin's the first student, still making his morning deliveries around it. Lena's still in school. Teresa sends her home before dark. Jonah started treatment at a clinic for seniors. 4 hours of work a day, doctor's orders. Teresa makes sure he eats. Lena makes sure he takes his medicine. He doesn't like any of it. But for the first time in years, he's accepted that a person doesn't have to do everything alone. One afternoon, Michael walks in with his old work boots, the sole going again after months of wear. Jonah tells him to just buy a new pair. Michael smiles. "I know someone who can fix them." Jonah asks when he needs them. Michael pulls an envelope from his jacket. Grey Haven Adult Education Center. He'd put off the form for weeks. The night before, Lena helped him finish the last section at the counter. His first class starts at 7. "This one's a little urgent," he says. Jonah looks at him, then at the boots. He pulls out the wooden chair. Sit down. Outside, the trains still run along the tracks. Trucks still honk. People still hurry toward wherever they're going. But sometimes, someone stops in front of the shop, sets down a coffee, brings in a bag of pastries, leans through the door just to ask how Jonah's feeling today. Jonah starts pulling the old stitching from Michael's boot. After a while, he stops, looks at the wooden box, the new bench and back, the people passing outside. I used to think I was just keeping their shoes from falling apart. Michael looks at him. Turns out, Jonah says, the whole time, they were keeping me from falling too. Greyhaven doesn't get any quieter. The city doesn't get richer. It certainly doesn't get easier to live in. But under the tracks in Iron Row, there's still a door that opens at 5 in the morning, and people who remember to stop when someone needs them. Because sometimes, what keeps a person walking isn't a good pair of shoes. It's knowing that if they stumble, someone will stop. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If Jonah's story brought someone to mind, someone who helped, without asking for anything back, tell us about them in the comments below. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people you love.